A massive thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. Stick around for a special offer that will get you 2 months of Skillshare Premium for free. In late November 2019, Xbox head Phil Spencer gave an interview regarding Microsoft's upcoming Series X console, in which he said that VR wasn't going to be a focus of the project, stating that he viewed VR as isolating, where he saw the strength of games as more of a communal exercise, that VR wasn't selling and that people weren't asking for it. And while he was clear that people can go elsewhere if they want that experience, it's hard not to view these comments made by the head of one of the most well-known brands in video games as pretty damning of VR as a whole. And it's understandable to a certain extent. A perfect storm of high costs, PC hardware and physical space requirements, a lack of truly content-heavy games, all topped off with a general experience whose immersion is incredibly difficult to sell to people through traditional channels, have all led to the uptake on VR being much slower than some eager developers might have anticipated, with various teams shutting down or refocusing their efforts in the last couple of years. To some, the whole venture might seem like a failed experiment. But as someone who recently picked up an Oculus Quest, it's hard to take this stance or Spencer's comments particularly seriously at all, right now at least. It's been a slow process, but VR seems like it's in the best place it's been in years, with the aforementioned Quest barreling through those entry requirements, both financial and physical, with Valve using the tech to revive Half-Life, and the fact that it is selling, VR seems closer than ever to achieving the mainstream adoption I think it deserves. Because even beyond all the sales stuff, VR is just so goddamn cool. To dismiss it as a gimmick, I think, is to ignore its very real potential to completely shake up every aspect of how games are designed and played. It forces us to question how well-established genres and trends are adapted, how interfaces are navigated, everything we've previously taken for granted. That is to say, VR has been a revitalizing, revolutionary experience for me, and I believe it can be the same for the industry as a whole too. Interestingly though, these thoughts only started to come about for me after booting up a version of a game I'd already played. But before we get into what that game is, let me quickly tell you about today's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes covering dozens of creative and entrepreneurial skills. Whether you want to fuel your curiosity, creativity, or even career, Skillshare is the perfect place to keep you learning and thriving. Premium membership gives you unlimited access, so you can join any of the classes and communities that suit your particular needs. You know what rules in VR? Videos of soaring aerial landscapes. With that in mind, why not check out Introduction to Aerial Videography, Creative Direction for Drone Filming, where you'll be taken through the entire process of getting the perfect shot from planning and safety considerations right through to the different kinds of camera tricks you can pull off in the air. Skillshare is also incredibly affordable. An annual subscription is less than $10 a month. And because Skillshare is sponsoring this video, you can sign up with my link in the description and get a 2-month free trial, so there's no risk to checking it out for yourself. Thanks again to Skillshare for sponsoring the video, and now back to the game that started to shift my ideas on how destabilising VR as a platform can actually be. Superhot, what many consider to be VR's killer app, is maybe the dumbest I have ever looked playing a game, but it's simultaneously the coolest I've ever felt. While to an onlooker this action translates to a series of gesticulations, contortions, and gawking facial expressions that make it look like you've just dunted a not insignificant quantity of psychedelics, this awkwardness belies what's actually happening inside the headset. A cavalcade of hyper-focused bobs and weaves, physically placing yourself in just the right spot and seizing upon the myriad opportunities to pull off unbelievably cool shit on the fly. Reaching out and grabbing an enemy's gun from their hand, bludgeoning them with it, then turning and taking cover from the flurry of bullets headed your way. I can honestly say it's a thrill unlike any other I've experienced in a video game. And what's interesting about Superhot in particular is that it's probably the most obvious example I can think of where VR significantly changes how you play. The core of the title's time moves when you move stick remains, the same system that turned the FPS genre from mindless bombast to something resembling a puzzle game. But here, because it's actually you physically doing the moving, aiming your weapons and ducking behind cover, it results in a renewed tension that brings that more visceral shooter feel back into focus. In other words, it's less cerebral than its non-VR counterpart. You're not so focused on thinking your way through these scenarios as you are doing. Making a video on the original Superhot earlier this year re-established it as maybe one of my favourite games, but having played the VR component, going back to vanilla feels decidedly tame now, when I'm not actually staring down the barrels of multiple shotguns. Superhot VR was the title that got me thinking just how different a game can be in virtual reality, even if it bears all the hallmarks of the same game out of VR. But I was also told it would have that effect on me. What was perhaps less expected is that this kind of perspective shift isn't limited to super stylized titles. The way we talk about more simulative action is fundamentally different in VR. A game like Gun Club sells itself on its more grounded aesthetic, placing you in a series of shooting galleries and encouraging you to caress every part of its lovingly rendered firearms. Reloading a gun, usually a single button press, is here a multi-stage physical process of unloading a clip, reaching for another, placing it in, then readying your weapon. It's designed to feel real, and also happens to be one of the more uncanny experiences I've had in VR as a result. It's really fun for sure, but it's also wacky as hell, and this is down to one thing: recoil, or the lack thereof. Controller vibration can only get you so far in conveying the pushback of these weapons as you fire them, and the need to keep your hands accurately tracked at all times means that holding your hand still will largely negate any kind of bullet spread, no matter your gun's stopping power. A hulking weapon you'd normally expect to blow your shoulder off now sees you wielding your semi-auto shotgun in one hand with ease as if you're BJ Blazkowicz, while the pistol, a weapon that would typically see players sacrificing power for speed and control, suddenly represents a much greater challenge thanks to its smaller, more fiddly components. In VR, authenticity can now only get you so far on the software side of things. You can no longer rely on a player's suspension of disbelief that comes from controlling a quote-unquote simulation with a mouse and keyboard and staring at a screen. The player is holding these objects, and that comes with all kinds of expectations of weight and power, potentially shifting how we think about things like weapon balance in shooters. And this is potentially an issue for more serious games, but there are those that actively play into that uncanniness, presenting sandbox-esque environments that create comedy out of fumbling around to grab an object and the clumsiness that can often result from that. These games are all relatively simple, they might not be super content-rich on their own, but honestly, what's becoming clear with VR the more I engage with it is that a little tactility goes a long way in keeping me coming back to them. Take a game like No Man's Sky for instance, whose VR component I'm now able to play thanks to the recent release of the Oculus Link beta, which despite some understandable technical issues, essentially turns my Quest into a Rift, opening up a wealth of previously inaccessible PC-only experiences. No Man's Sky in particular was originally a game in which traversing space was often effortless to the point of triviality, a means to an end of getting to another planet I suppose. But it takes on a whole new meaning when you're in that cockpit, surrounded by glowing monitors you turn your head to examine, physically manipulating levers and joysticks to move around. Suddenly, the core of No Man's Sky's action, exploring planets to gather items, itself becomes the means to the end of getting to fly my ship around some more. Waiting in hyperdrive for up to a minute at a time ceases to be the chore that it once was. It relaxes me. It's a break from the physical work I've done in order to get my ship off the ground. Physically inhabiting that space is often its own reward. And by extension, what would otherwise be considered budget experiences or even interactive movies can become so much more in VR. For example, there's very little mechanical engagement to be had with the Star Wars tie-in that came bundled with my Quest, but one thing that can't be so easily sold to people, especially through video captured like this, is the sense of scale that VR provides. Everyone never thought I'd be taken aback at the sight of Darth Vader, for example, and perhaps this is just me, but when a full-sized version of that dude is getting up in your face for the first time, it's an unnerving experience, just as it is staring out at these now massive ships and seemingly endless expanses that previously have been difficult to imagine because I wasn't there like I am now. Similarly, I love I Expect You to Die. It's a really neat game that juxtaposes a noir aesthetic with the cartoon chaos of a VR sandbox to create these comic, complex, physical puzzles, along with clever grabbing mechanics that help to avoid frustration when your poking and prodding leads to you throwing a key item out of reach. But the one thing I keep returning to, it seems, is that credit sequence, as people stylishly point point guns at you with missiles going off around them and billboard-sized names scroll past your eyes. It's like being inside a Bond intro. It's the same with the first steps tutorial provided by Oculus. More exciting than the swing ball or the ping pong bat is the whale that flies over your head, and it's the size of an actual whale. What I've found is that quantity of content in VR often doesn't matter as much as just being. Maybe I'm just late to the party on this, and it all sounds super lame and cliche, but I don't care. There are so many aspects to this that bring into stark focus how I play and think about video games. Things like the lack of comfort features in a game like Boneworks, designed to be VR's biggest narrative-focused action title to date, point to the fact that even half a decade after VR's re-emergence as a going concern, developers are still being forced to consider potential issues with the most basic building blocks of the medium. Some people, myself included, can't play this game because the lack of movement options makes them feel sick, but thanks to the team's vision of physically rendering a body in the game space for the sake of immersion, snap-based teleport controls simply wouldn't work. In VR, how you move your character is a massive accessibility concern. It potentially shuts a large portion of the player base off from your game based on this one simple decision, and the commitment to any one style in the face of that fact then borders on an artistic choice. Figuring out basic movement in VR is an art. But it's not just the fundamentals of gameplay that change in VR. Interfaces take on a different purpose when that headset goes on, morphing from purely functional to experiences unto themselves. Menus are now these ridiculously cozy, homely environments. Loading screens are now breathtaking vistas. There's something calming about being alone in these quiet worlds. Watching Netflix in a facade of a cabin in the mountains is a tool I've used to relax myself when I get stressed. Casually flying around the world in Google Earth is genuinely therapeutic. Being able to escape to the summit of Mount Everest via a YouTube video is powerful, and it's sometimes a little disappointing to take off that headset as a result. And without wishing to get all Black Mirror on you, in years to come, as hardware becomes less bulky, as users become less aware of the fact they're wearing this big thing on their face, there's a part of me that's curious if we'll eventually encounter the problem of people becoming lost in these worlds, where they shut themselves off from those around them. This is a platform that redefines escapism. You're choosing to some extent to block out one reality in favour of another. That VR could potentially be used to help with all kinds of neurological or mental health issues has been researched long before the technology's most recent boom in the mid-2010s. But there's been surprisingly little work done into how that technology itself could create issues of addiction, or the possible implications of letting people handle guns or enact violence in such detail. Video games don't make you violent, but can we be so sure about VR? And also check out Lamhoot's channel for his upcoming behemoth on that very topic. The point is, questions we've long since considered answered in traditional games become foggier once VR enters the equation. And that's what I mean when I say that everything about games as we've come to know them changes in some capacity with VR. We've become so used to generational upgrades manifesting in these barely noticeable increases in graphical fidelity, but here we have something so relatively new, so potentially destabilising, that its implications can be as scary as they are exciting. But none of these potential issues detract from how elated I've been regarding this technology since getting my Quest, and crucially, I'm not alone. When showing the headset to my family for the first time, my dad was absolutely astounded that he could soar over Victoria Falls. My mum couldn't believe the fact that a full-size robot had just appeared right in front of her and that she could interact with it. We laughed as the person in the headset floundered while attempting to describe this entirely new thing they were seeing, experiencing. And when they returned to reality, it wasn't the same as when they'd played Wii Bowling or whatever all those years ago, which they recognised at the time as a fun novelty. This was different. It was genuine awe. They kept talking about how incredible it was, how real and futuristic it felt. It seemed like they understood my world, my investment in games, a little better than they did before, and they begged me to bring the Quest back round for Christmas so the rest of the family could experience these wonders too. And that, for me, is possibly the biggest way VR changes things, the real point at which Spencer's prior comments fall apart. That even with someone inside a headset, this was one of the most genuinely communal experiences I've had with technology in years. That if the barriers to entry continue to diminish as they have done with the Quest, VR not only has the potential to break into the mainstream as a commercial success, but more importantly, use games to bring people together. So I hope you enjoyed my piece on VR. Thank you again to Skillshare for sponsoring the video and for the 2-month free trial you can access via the link in the description. I'd also like to sincerely thank my patrons whose support following that last update video was staggering and moving in a way I couldn't have anticipated. I legitimately cannot thank you enough for your support in helping this channel continue. If you liked what you saw and want to join the names on screen, consider heading to patreon.com/writingongames and donating even $1 or $2. Every pledge helps more than you can possibly know. Special thanks go to Mark B. Writing, Martin Rosat, Artyom Vitsyuk, Leah Chinello, Konstantinos Sikinis, Henry Milek, Edward Clayton Andrews, Milemonides the Unwise, Hebe Amori, Rob, Bryce Snyder, Tommy Carver-Chaplin, David Björk, Lucas, Dallas Keane, William Fielder, my dad, Timothy Jones, The Nameless Guy, Ham Megas, Samuel Pickens, Shardfire, Anna Pimentel, Jesse Ryan, Justin's Holderness, Nicholas Ross, and Charlie Yang. And with that, this has been another episode of Writing on Games. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.